Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to the show. My name's Mavis Robinson. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Dan Jarvis. Dan Jarvis is a lifetime resident of Bourne, and Dan, thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you.
And as in so many things in life, I wouldn't have even, 2 weeks ago, I never would have known that I'd be here, but then I got a call from Diane to come over, and I'm glad to, you know.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Think that,
and Diane Flynn is our one of our producers, and so you guys grew up together,
we
right?
go way back to high school.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, the point of departure, I thought, for talking now was my arrival here this morning. And I could look to my left and see what was the Waldorf School. Yes. But that was our high school. Okay. Diane and I were the last of the people to be in there as a high school. Yeah. In after New Year's, going into 1961, we came to the brand new high school, which is this. Which is where we are now. They opened it up. Yep. Yeah. And we were still on double sessions. However, you know, they were still getting the double session thing together. So people would go from 7 to noon or noon to 5, you know, because they were just getting all the schools finished and built. And so by the time we got in here, then they could go to the regular sessions. I didn't
realize that. So for a while, when you were at the old high school, there were so many kids that you had to, you split up the days?
We had double sessions. I remember doing double sessions for certainly 7th and 8th grade. Yeah. You know, so you're talking 58 to about 61. Okay. And I always seem to have the afternoon one, so I could stay up late and watch Jack Parr.
Yeah,
you know, and things like that. but that's the way it was. I don't know how the schools met. And by the way, going back to the earlier days, I was among the first in that school, the People's Elementary School. The people, and they're talking about taking it down or doing something with the building. Yeah. Well, I was among the first to go from what is now the library to the People's School.
Right.
They were, and before, they were having people all over the place, starting off in first grade, even though I lived on Harrison Avenue in Buzzards Bay, we would be bused over to the Sagamore School. Okay. For a couple of months. Yeah. Then over to across from the you know, the school administration building. Well, that was called the Leonard Wood Legion Hall. Okay. It was the Legion building. Yeah. But we had first grade downstairs, second grade upstairs.
I never knew kids went to school in that building.
Oh yeah, for quite a while. So I had almost after Sagamore, went over and had first grade there and second grade with Mrs. Moreland downstairs, and Mrs. Laura Crump upstairs. She was an old Bourne person too, you know.
And so this is all, I mean, you're a baby boomer. You're part of that generation. Yeah, right. So the town was challenged with more kids than they had.
It's post-World War II. Yep. And you got that feeling. I mean, Cape Cod was bustling in the summer, but I will tell you this, on any given day in the middle of the winter, there's more traffic on the Cape now than there was on the 4th of July back in those days. Yeah. That's how it's flipped over, but the winter was completely quiet. Right. And I remember our parents, they went bowling or they played cards at each other's house. There was nothing to do, really. It was no fast food restaurants. There was nothing like that. Yeah. And we were just, you know, most people were just getting TVs, you know, it was all about radio, you know? Yep. And so growing up in Buzzards Bay, I just have a memory of, you know, being in downtown Buzzards Bay, and here's what it was, the trains coming and going. Okay. I mean, Buzzards Bay was a village created by the railroad. Yeah. Created by the railroad. It wasn't, before that it was just Taylor's Point, and it had 3 estates out there owned by the Taylors who owned the Boston Globe. Oh, wow. And my great-grandmother and grandfather, who I never met, he passed away when I was really little, he was a caretaker of the Taylor estate. Oh, wow. So they lived in a house that was just demolished 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah. I was sorry they took it down. They lived there in this house that looked like a Maine farmhouse.
This is your grandparents?
Yeah, my great-grandparents. You know, Mary Robbins was the last name. Yeah. And so that was what Buzzards Bay was to me, visiting them and in Taylor's Point. And by that time, there were other houses in Taylor's Point. And he had passed away, but she still had lifetime tenure until she passed away. She lived in that house. Oh, wow. But the Taylors, I know, moved away from Taylor's Point, probably starting with a 1938 hurricane that flooded the area. Okay. Because if you see pictures of Buzzards Bay, there's is right up to the windows of cars.
Yes,
the whole thing is flooded.
Yeah, I have seen pictures. It's
and so 1938 and 1954 that happened both times. You know?
Yep.
I've always had a theory that before they built the canal and it was just the Monument River coming out, I don't think there were floods like that in that area. So when people were first, I think that when they built the canal, now you had tidal surges that could come from both ways and rise up.
Yeah, some of the marshes.
And the marshes absorb water too.
Yeah.
And there was only one direction that the surge would come in Buzzards Bay and be absorbed by the Monument River.
Right.
But I didn't know any of this when I was little. I'm just living, we moved up to Head of the Bay Road, which I later realized that's really where the Cape begins. Head of the Bay Road, Bourne, Dale, and North Sagamore, the old Sandwich Plymouth town line.
How old were you when you moved to Head of the Bay?
Just going into first grade.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so you'd think it would be, we're away from everything. No, it seemed to me we had pathways going into the woods. We had cranberry bogs. We could get out to the head of the bay. As we got big enough to ride bikes, we're going it was a huge. It was a rural world, but it had a lot of different things, which I now realize were old Indian pathways. And the cranberry bogs were converted wetlands. I remember seeing the helicopters come over and spray the cranberry bogs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, way back when. Now it was pesticide.
Yeah.
It was they probably don't do it like that now. You know, but that was. And I'm sitting there. Oh, look at that helicopter! But they would flood all those bogs in the winter.
Yep.
And Diane and Skip will tell you. Because he lived right up the street from me.
Oh, wow.
I grew up with Skip the Barlows, you know. They were my neighbors, and the Trips, the Barlows, the Stocktons, the Youngs, they were my neighbors. And we'd go skating on those bogs.
Oh, cool.
And in the 1950s, we had some colder winters that the ice was pretty dependable.
Yes.
And we're skating all winter long. And you could skate on one bog and just walk with your skates over to another bog, skate over there. You could connect the bogs and then be skating on Bumps Pond too.
Wow.
And then also the other place that we skated a lot on was Bourne's Pond, you know, right there in Main Street.
Yes.
Across from there's a Luna.
Yeah.
But we called it Peggy's Pond.
Okay.
Because there was a restaurant right there on the corner. It's a real estate, and it was called Peggy's on the Pond.
Yeah.
So we took to calling it Peggy's Pond. You know, and we would skate on that.
Yeah. But you know, that's an interesting story about the winters being colder, because I've heard that a few times as we've been talking to people.
Now I know that you talk about the climate change and all that may or may not be true. I won't get into that right now, but I'll tell you, if we could have another, you know, some winters when it gets colder. Those polar vortexes were coming down, and we've had some cold, snowy winters, have we not?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Hasn't been sustained, and I don't know if it's been enough to freeze the ponds.
The ice has not been formed.
Hasn't formed, and then the snow would mess it up anyway.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
But we certainly have had plenty of snow. Remember last year where it snowed halfway into March?
Yes.
But that's neither. But we certainly had some skatable.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you went back years before that, the Cape is warmer in the winter, 10 degrees, than it is inland.
We do,
on
the
the average,
insulation
because
of
we're near
the ocean.
We're near the Gulf Stream.
Yeah, yeah. So I love that image of kids. And this is Captain, who's coming into the shot here.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
He's my co-host. He might have a question for us later.
That's
I'll
right.
let you know.
Feel free to bark out a request.
Right.
Yep.
So I do love that image of kids using, you know, almost like using the bogs as a form of transportation with the skates.
And here's another thing. They were safe, because most of the bog, you're just going to go in a foot down to the bog.
Right.
And if you were really worried about, I'm going to fall in, it'll be deep, just skate quickly over the ditch part, because it was a little, you could see the ditches, but it was very safe skating.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So
even if you fell in, you weren't. It wasn't going to be that far.
And it's really sad, because I go down Puritan Road now, and there's bumps on the left, and there's the former cranberry bog on the right, and it's going back to meadow.
Oh, okay.
Because it's not a cranberry bog anymore. It's not being flooded.
Yeah.
And I think that the law is you can't make a cranberry bog. If it's going to meadow, now you can't. It's gone into under a new law where you can't turn it into a cranberry bog.
It's already,
It's become meadow. It's become just wetland.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at that, remembering where we used to sit on the embankment, get our skates on and skate all over there. But you know, it's a memory now.
Right.
You know? That's the true of all these bogs. They're not flooding them because they're not being used.
Yeah. Yeah.
At a time, it's a pity, because the cranberry industry needs all the cranberries it can get, because they're selling them to China.
Right. Right. Yeah.
You know, but So now to get your cranberry experience, you go around the Cape here, or you go on that Route 53, I think it is, in Plymouth and Carver.
Yep.
That's where the string of cranberry bogs is just just unsurpassable. You know?
Now, so now you've done some tours on the Cape. Is that correct? As an adult.
And here comes to the theme where you never know what you're going to do in life. I mean, if you saw me in high school, I was not that good of a student where I did all the homework, and certain history was really a tough subject for me, you know?
Yeah.
And if I did the homework, I did all right. If I didn't, and I got a couple of low marks in history, and one low marks in French. But what happened was my yen to travel at high school was I wanted to go to Boston, and I went to art school in Boston.
Oh, okay.
And then it became I loved Boston. I lived in different parts of Boston for years. So even though I'm a resident here, I lived in Boston for years.
Yeah.
And then I met some people, I went to art school, I met some people who were from France. And then I got the real yen to go to France. So long story short, I studied some French on my own in Cambridge.
Yeah.
And really learned a bit. You know, when you're motivated, you want to do something, it's different than, I say to any kid, don't be discouraged from something. You might turn out to really like a subject later that you don't think you like now. Keep your mind open. Because then I hitchhiked around France in 1970 when youth hostels cost the equivalent of 50 cents a night.
Wow.
And you could make $1,500, $2,000 stretch for 6 months.
Yeah.
And I got to know a lot of people. Somebody said, you should go to Chartres Cathedral. That's really something. And I hitchhiked up there, and I got hooked. Going into these, I started collecting cathedrals.
Oh,
I would hitchhike from Chartres, Mont Saint-Michel, Amiens, Bourges, Strasbourg. I linked up my travels with going inside cathedrals, and I felt like I was time travel, going back to the 1100s.
Yeah,
I could feel it. I could just sense it. And that's when my love of history started.
Yeah.
But I would never have guessed that way down the line, I would become a tour guide, you know, and that happened 23 years ago when I was, somebody said, a friend of mine, Herb Dam, who Diane knows, you know, we was one of our schoolmates, and another friend of ours, David Melville, I think she knows who he is too, in New York, they were doing tours, and then Herb got into it in Boston. Herb said, Dan, you ought to come up here and take Boston by foot, you know, you can make tips and everything, you know, and I started doing that. Nothing came of that, but I was really intrigued, but I was very nervous trying to do the Boston by foot tours, to stand in front of people and try to talk about...
Memorize a script, right?
Yeah, and even or just trying to get the basic points I was very nervous, but I let that go, and then nothing happened. A year and a half later, I read in the paper that a good friend of mine, I think Kathy McWilliams, told me about a ad in the paper. They're looking for tour guides at a company called Torco in Hyannis. Long story short, I took the training. You know, we went out in vans. Turned out we would go to Newport, Martha's Vineyard, around the Cape, Boston, and a lot of people would drop out. Oh, this is too much for me. I stuck with it. I thought, oh, I'm liking this idea. Except I'd never set foot on Martha's Vineyard in my whole life. I'd been in Nantucket a few times. Yeah. And here I am. I'm going to be...
So you've been to France, but you hadn't been to the
vineyard.
vineyard.
I hadn't been to Martha's Vineyard. I'd always wanted to go, and I never quite took the jump over there. And now here I am training to do tours over there. And I stuck with it. And then what happens is you ride with other people on their tours a couple of times. And then you go on a double bus tour. Then you're on your own. Yeah. And by that time, I was ready to give it a try, and looking, you know, trying to do my notes. And even then, I never would have thought that that I would stick with it for the next quarter century. Yeah, yeah. And then I would beg my boss, oh, let me train for Nova Scotia, please. I want to give that a try. I ended up doing 2 years of Nova Scotia tours.
Oh, wow.
But in the meantime, because of the Torco thing of being every week going to Newport, Boston, the Cape, Plymouth, became pretty good at those places, and I started getting a lot of separate work in Boston. And so I just love doing Boston tours, and I do Lexington and Concord and, you know, Gloucester and things like that, and I love history. And this is from someone who actually didn't do too well in history in high school because I hadn't caught fire with it yet.
Well, it feels a little bit like high school history is a lot of memorization and dates and feels dry, but true history is stories.
Well, there's one, that's true, and I hadn't quite got that yet.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, I was still weak in my reading skill. You know, that's another thing. Schools should catch these young kids. They might be able to read a little, but they need to have some way to encourage them to get their reading skills going, so that they get caught up. And if they can read a bit, people think they're okay, but they're not doing the homework because reading is still a chore.
Right.
But I kept reading, and I remember in junior year, Mrs. Canary's class, I read on my own the Bounty Trilogy by Nordhoff and Hall.
Yep.
That was the first thing of my very own that became mine.
Yes.
And that I loved the experience of it. And Mrs. Canary was encouraging to me. And so even though I was still behind in reading skill, I was off and running for the rest of my life as loving reading.
Yeah.
And so then that was what, looking back, if I had the reading skill better, I would have been better in history. Maybe I would have caught fire in history a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's just a little late, but one never knows.
Right,
you know?
right.
So
well, and I love that, you know, the Bounty Trilogy. I mean, that's basically fact-based.
It's fact-based.
Yeah,
yep,
yeah, but it's written like fiction. It's an engaging
there's
story.
a narrator named Roger Byam who really didn't exist, and you think, but it's very fact-based.
Yeah.
And you see what happens. I mean, they're taking breadfruit they got to get breadfruit to bring back to the Caribbean to then feed the slaves.
Right, right.
And what happened? They were out there so long that the crew, and Fletcher Christian, who's from the Isle of Man, he's just to put a long story short, Captain Bligh, who's really a very able mariner and a fantastic navigator. He was with Captain Cook, you know, and but he could let things go, and then explode in anger. He was that kind of guy. And Fletcher Christian was a very sensitive guy. To make a long story short, they had a mutiny and set him on a longboat, and they went to a place called Pitcairn Island.
Right.
And
where the descendants of the mutineers are still living
live
there.
And some of them have moved to Norfolk Island,
Yeah.
but they're back and forth. And here's the thing, why is it called Pitcairn? You know, I go to Lexington and Concord, and there's Major Pitcairn was one of the people on the Lexington Green, you know, trying to restrain his troop from killing 8 people on Lexington Green.
Yeah.
It was his son who, previous to that, in the 1760s, had been on a cruise through a British cruise through the South Seas, and they said, we're looking for an island that's the first person that spots it, you know, and it was Island Ho, and okay, was Captain, you know, Lieutenant Pitcairn or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So they named it after him, and he was
wow.
the son of the Pitcairn of the Lexington and Concord thing.
Oh,
Isn't that
interesting. Yeah, yeah.
But it was a little bit it was put on the chart just a little bit wrong, so that when the Bounty mutineers got to it, and then treated, see, they had a lot of Tahitians with the men and women.
Yeah.
Well, the English men treated the Tahitian Englishmen treated the Tahitian men badly.
Right.
And then they ended up that the Tahitian women killed some of the Bounty mutineers. There was a lot of killing off.
Yeah, yeah.
And only a
culture
guy.
clash.
There was a guy named John Adams left over, and a Nantucket ship came by, a whaling ship comes by the sign. What's this? And a guy comes rowing out, and he's like a Tahitian guy. He's like a native, but he gets up and, who are you? Oh, my name is Thursday October Christian.
Uh-huh.
And they see, nobody knew where the Bounty mutineers had ever gone, because they didn't know where Pitcairn Island exactly was.
Yeah.
And the guys on the Nantucket ship went, oh my God,
Wow.
this is it.
Yeah.
This is what they've been looking for. And so they had found the descendants. There was new descendants growing on Pitcairn Island.
It was generations later.
And this one, John Adams, his nickname was, he was the only one left of the mutineers, and they gave him a pardon.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that is amazing.
And I love these stories.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to tell people on my bus tours these stories, whether it be, you know, the Cape Codders and...
Well, I feel like you're in a sort of a unique position to have those great stories about Cape Cod and about Bourne. Any that pop into your mind that are interesting about our town that people might be surprised by?
Well, as I say, I always say Buzzards Bay, created by the railroad.
Yeah.
You know? And then our town is a thing of division. I mean, Bourne separates from Sandwich. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's one separation. And then the canal comes and divides Bourne,
right.
but it also divides a little piece of Sandwich, so that Scusset, that's all in Sandwich,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
And so there are things like that, and I always I say that Bourne has the elements of the old Cape Codders and the Methodist Church, and there had been a congregational church that was part of Sandwich, because
right. But now it's the Bourne.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. The Methodist Church was the one that kind of took hold,
Okay,
I suppose.
yeah.
You know,
The one
and
right
then,
on Sandwich Road.
Yeah. And I suppose now the Congregational Church, if you were still Congregationalist, you were going to Sandwich. You know, although I'm trying to think if there was any other Congregational, and there was other churches. There was one other church down in Katamet there, and I'm trying to think of what that was.
That's a Methodist church.
That's a Methodist also. So the Methodists and Methodists were great because they were out there the first ones to go to the common people and do things, you know, and kind of the way Jesus did, you know, by rule and method. They were, and they were called Methodists, but for that reason. But I didn't know any of that growing up. All I knew was that up in the head of the Bay Road, we had all these pathways. The bus would come and get me, and we'd go over the Bourne Bridge every single day to come to school.
Yep.
And so the beauty of the canal was there. You know, you'd see, but you'd take it for granted.
Right.
You didn't realize. You thought it was there forever.
Yeah.
Not realizing that. Come to think of it, if we're going over the Bourne Bridge to school, let's say the mid-50s, to come to the elementary school or. Those bridges were only 20 years old.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
They were brand new.
Yeah.
And they got built because the thing that interests me is why we know the canal was built in 1915, and they had this wonderful celebration with the fireworks shooting out of the
parade.
and the fireworks shooting out of the railroad bridge.
Yeah.
I'm amazed that the Corps of Engineers even allowed that. You know, and the
the one that just happened.
Yeah,
2
and that
years
was
ago.
all about the 100th anniversary of the canal. It's one of the Corps of Engineers even allowed that in view of 9/11 and all that. They must have watched over really close that nobody did anything more than. But it was a beautiful thing.
It was beautiful. Yeah.
But why did they? The widening of the canal is the key thing. And sometimes unexpected things caused that. And that was a German U-boat in 1918 attacked a tugboat and 3 coal barges that were coming down, I think, from Maine or Nova Scotia or someplace. They were going to avoid the canal because the prices were high to go through the canal.
Yeah.
It was a little tricky because it was narrower, it hadn't been widened. And so the Germans had made 2 of these U-boats. That one came to Long Island and created havoc, and one I think they were looking to mess up the transatlantic cable.
Okay.
But I don't know, they just gave up on that. But they decided to shell this tugboat off of Orleans. There were families on these boats.
Yeah.
The families on the tugboat, they all got rescued. One guy got kind of seriously injured, but the Cape Codders came and rescued them all.
But the boat sank?
The boat sank. The coal barges were lost. I give to understand that the tugboat was actually rescued and refurbished.
Okay, yeah.
Well, this is when, to make a long story short, the government thought, we want to make this canal part of the intra-coastal waterway.
Okay.
So that any kind of shipping that we want to keep from going out to a vulnerable open.
So that's why they were in Orleans, because they couldn't. Getting through the canal.
Well, they could have gone through the canal, but a lot of these shipping didn't want to use the narrow canal because for one thing, they would charge a pretty high price.
Right.
You know,
so it was expensive and difficult.
The Perry company that did it, who was, by the way, a descendant of the Perrys right here in Bourne.
Oh wow! Yeah.
The Perrys, the Quaker Perrys.
Yeah.
And some of them had moved to Rhode Island, and he knew this August Perry Belmont when he dug the canal. He had a little pride that. This is my own my ancestral territory. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
But it wasn't wide enough. I mean, there were accidents, and it would cost money. So a lot of people would avoid it, and that's what was happening when this U-boat came up. One of the 2 long-distance U-boats that the Germans had at that point, and they just decided to shell the thing. Now, some airplanes from Chatham kind of came over with their bi-wings and threw some hand bombs down in there, but nothing happened, but the submarine went away. But that's when the government said, we want this canal to be part of the intracoastal waterway, and it ended up that the Corps of Engineers widened it to 500 something feet.
Yep.
20, what is it, 30, 25, 30 feet depth or whatever it is, I forget.
Yeah.
Well, let's just say 30 feet at low tide, so that all the shipping, 125-foot clearance of all 3 bridges. It's that U-boat attack that spurred this to happen when it did. It might not have happened. We might have still been using drawbridges in the 1950s.
Right.
And then
that would have changed the town.
It would have certainly been, people would have wanted to come to the Cape, but imagine, they already had big traffic jams at the drawbridges.
Right.
Can you imagine
what
they were? And they were still big traffic jams even in the big bridge era.
Yeah.
Until they made the Route 25 you know.
Yep.
And of course, I knew Mrs. Ingersoll, but growing up in Head of the Bay, we'd go up to the Grazing Fields Farm and be in the 4-H club, and we could go up there through the woods, and we knew Mrs. Ingersoll that owned it. And it was her son, I think, who played a part in getting the legal things to have them go around, rather than having that highway come right down through the Head of the Bay Road and wiping out, you know.
Buzzards Bay,
or wiping out that nice part of the shoreline that we, you know, in the Head of the Bay. You know, so that was a nice show. So I knew her going way back when too, you know. So growing up in Buzzards Bay, it was, and here's the other thing, the summer people came. So the world came to us.
Did you have friends that you would see in the summer from, you know, year to year?
Yes, and we had, and there was the summer girls.
And
some nice summer, but there were the summer girls, and they came to Bournedale, and you know, I met some people through Diane because she knew people, and then I worked at a place in Buzzards Bay called Elmer's, a driving range where the post office is now. It was miniature golf and a driving range, and people would come in there, and we just knew summer people all the time. It was part of life. And then the other thing was going to Bourne High School. Another part of the world came to us, Otis Air Force Base. We had
kids from all over.
This building here, this high school that we went into especially, was just loaded with people from all over the country. And we considered Otis to be another village in the town of Bourne. And I think that to my way of feeling, we loved these people and they kind of loved us. In fact, some of the reunions of the mid-60s reunions, these people come from all over the country. They think of this as their real hometown, you know, or at least their home high school. So we had that, the summer people, the Otis people. So here we are and then growing up a little semi-awareness of the Kennedys coming to Hyannis. So you had the sense that the world was coming to you on an otherwise, where Cape Cod was before the railroad, the most isolated part of New England. Now the world is coming to it. We grew up in a time, the post-World War II era, when the world was coming to us.
Well, and it's such a wonderful mix of that rural feeling, yet the cosmopolitan overlap, because people were here. In the summers at least.
I can remember being at what we call Buzzards Bay Beach, which is over just down by Electric Avenue. That's a whole other thing. There used to be a bridge that came over from Onset, and the electric trolley car came over.
Is that why they called it Electric Avenue?
That's right.
Oh, I didn't know
because
that.
It went from Onset to Monument Beach and back, connecting two summer colonies, because Monument Beach and Onset were very much summer colonies. Onset started out as like an Oak Bluffs kind of place, you know, with a Christian campground. And the house, and then Monument Beach too, because Monument was the name of the town. It's like Manomet. It's the same as Manomet, but it was the only real beach. So that's why it was Monument Beach. That's where the summer colony sprung up, because the railroad came through, and they decided to link the two with this electric railway that came. So
I was fascinated when I found out that there was an electric railway, like basically having a subway in our town.
I wish I had brought it. You know, there's in the 50th anniversary magazine of the Cape Cod Canal, the 50th anniversary of the Cape Cod Canal, which I'm sorry to say, I remember it really well. I remember it all too well, and it was 50 years ago last year. But they had a nice magazine. They printed a lot of things, and they had this wonderful picture of looking down Electric Avenue at the inlet there, Buzzards Bay Beach, and you can see that it's a car bridge. I think there was a little draw in the middle, and the tracks. So of the.
You know, I have seen that picture. I think we have that magazine at the Bourne Historical Society.
It out. I'll send it over. I'll drop it over, because what I did was I took a picture of it last month, and then I took a picture of it to be exactly line up with the original picture. So I'll bring that over. I wish I'd brought it today.
Well, Dan, I just have to thank you so much for coming in today. You have such an energy and you have such great stories, and you're not going to believe it, but our time is up.
Oh my gosh! I always say, sometimes on my tours when I get really talking, I say, I hope I made some sense.
No, you were fantastic. I loved your stories, and thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd love to share your stories with a window to Bourne, please give us a call at the Bourne Historical Society. We'd love to talk to you as well. And Dan, thank you so much for being here.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for having me.